Nancy Guthrie said no, and 2 weeks later, she was gone.
There are moments in a case that change everything. Not the dramatic moments, not the ones that make headlines. The quiet ones, the ones that happen at a dinner table, in a living room, between two people who share the same blood. One word spoken, one word refused, and 2 weeks later, one of those people was gone. Nancy Guthrie said no. That is where this story begins. Not on the night she disappeared. Not with the doorbell camera or the masked figure or the pacemaker data that sent investigators scrambling. It begins weeks before any of that. It begins with a request. A daughter asking her mother for money. And a mother who said no. That word, that single two-letter word, did not just end a conversation. It may have ended everything. Before getting into what that refusal means and why it changes the entire shape of this investigation, there is something that needs to be said about who Nancy Guthrie actually is. Because it is very easy to get consumed by timelines and financial records and forensic data and forget that at the center of all of this is a real woman. A woman with a name.
A documented, sequenced, undeniable financial picture that runs from May of 2025 all the way to the morning Annie Guthrie called 911.
A woman with a life. A woman who is still missing. Nancy Guthrie is 84 years old. She lives in the Catalina Foothills neighborhood of Tucson, Arizona. If you know Tucson, you know exactly what that means. The Catalina Foothills is one of the most beautiful and most sought-after residential areas in the entire state. The homes there sit against the backdrop of the Santa Catalina Mountains, surrounded by saguaro cactus and desert light. It is the kind of neighborhood where people spend their whole lives working toward. Nancy did not stumble into that home. She earned it. She raised her children largely on her own. She worked. She sacrificed. She built a life inside those walls that stretched across decades. Her garden, her porch, her Sunday morning church service that she never, not once, missed without reason. She was a woman of faith and routine. A woman who knew exactly what she had built and protected it carefully. She also had a pacemaker that regulated her heart. She took medication every evening at 10 o'clock without fail. She wore hearing aids, and every night before she went to sleep, those hearing aids came out.
A publication called Hayden Times reported that Annie Guthrie asked her mother Nancy for a loan in the weeks before Nancy disappeared. Nancy reportedly said no.
The moment they did, she was completely unable to hear anything happening around her. Completely unreachable by sound, and she was alone. No alarm system, no overnight help, no medical alert pendant around her neck. No dog, because the family dog had died and was never replaced. $1 million home, an 84-year-old woman. Zero protection. Hi viewers, here is a simple question and the answer genuinely matters for understanding this case. Do you think a family with the financial means to protect an elderly parent living alone has a responsibility to make sure those protections are in place? Yes or no? Leave it in the comments right now. On the evening of January 31, 2026, Nancy Guthrie had dinner with her daughter Annie and Annie's husband Tommaso at their home approximately 4 miles away. The ride there was fully documented. An Uber was requested from Nancy's residence at 5:32 in the evening. The driver picked her up.
That claim has not been confirmed by law enforcement. It has not been addressed publicly by the family, and it has not been denied. The amount of the loan request is unknown. The reason for the request is unknown.
The timestamp exists. The route exists. Everything about that first ride is on the record. The ride home is a different story entirely. But before getting to that ride, before getting to the 14 hours of silence that followed, before getting to the sealed 911 call in the car that the FBI held for over 40 days, there is a claim that surfaced in recent weeks that reframes every single piece of this case in a way that is very difficult to unsee. A publication called the Hayden Times reported that Annie Guthrie asked her mother Nancy for a loan in the weeks before Nancy disappeared. Nancy said no. Let that land for a moment. A daughter asked her mother for money. The mother refused, and less than 2 weeks later, that mother sat across from that daughter at a dinner table. And after that dinner, she was driven home by that daughter's husband. And when she walked through that door and the garage closed behind her, she was never seen again. Now, to be precise, because this case demands precision, the loan claim has not been confirmed by law enforcement.
The loan refusal did not create a new story. It gave an existing story a starting point it did not have before.
It has not been addressed publicly by the family. It has not been denied either. The exact amount requested is unknown. The exact date of that conversation is unknown. The reason behind the request is unknown. What is known is that this claim did not arrive in a vacuum. It arrived in the middle of a case where financial questions had already been accumulating for months. Property records, legal documents, a vehicle seized and held for weeks, boxes leaving a home whose owner has never been declared dead. The loan refusal did not create a new story. It gave an existing story a starting point it never had before. And once you see where that starting point leads, once you see what was already in motion 8 months before Nancy Guthrie disappeared, the picture that forms is one that is very hard to look away from. Because this financial trail does not begin with the loan request. It begins in May of 2025, with a document, and a signature, and a sequence of events that, when laid out from beginning to end, points in only one direction. May 2025, 8 months before Nancy Guthrie disappeared, a document was signed. Not a casual piece of paperwork, not something scribbled on a napkin. A durable power of attorney. A legal instrument. The kind of document that transfers real authority over real money and real property from one person to another. Tommaso Cion signed it, and the document named Annie Guthrie, his wife, as his agent over his financial and property matters. When this document surfaced in the public domain, people with legal backgrounds were quick to respond. Several of them called it routine. Standard paperwork, they said. The kind of thing people sign during a mortgage refinance or a property transfer. Completely normal, nothing to see here, and maybe that is exactly what it was. But here is what nobody said out loud. The timing places that document inside a very specific sequence. May 2025, a power of attorney is signed giving Annie authority over financial and property matters. Sometime before January 31, 2026, Annie reportedly asks her mother Nancy for a loan. Nancy says no. January 31, 2026, Nancy has dinner at Annie and Tommaso's home. February 1, 2026, Nancy is gone. Every single item in that sequence has an innocent explanation on its own. But the sequence has a direction, and the direction is financial. Now, to understand why that direction matters, the numbers have to be looked at. Because the numbers tell a story that no one in this case has been willing to say plainly. Nancy Guthrie's home in the Catalina foothills is valued at roughly $1 million. That is public record, anyone can look it up. It sits in one of the most desirable residential corridors in all of Tucson, Arizona. A home Nancy had lived in for decades. A home that represented the accumulated asset of a lifetime of hard work and sacrifice. Every room in that house carried weight, history, memory, value. Annie and Tommaso's home is approximately 4 miles away. Estimated value, around $650,000. That is a $350,000 gap between the mother's home and the home of the daughter who lived nearest to her. On its own, that gap means nothing. Parents often have more than their children. That is completely normal. But when the question being asked is why this woman, why this house, why this level of apparent planning, the value of what Nancy owned becomes deeply relevant. Because the most common motive in cases where an elderly person is targeted by someone within their own circle is not anger. It is not revenge. It is access. Access to assets that become available when the person who owns them is no longer present to say no. And Nancy was left in a position where saying no was the only protection she had. Think about that. No camera subscription. That service costs approximately $15 a month. It was not active. No medical alert pendant. Less than $1 a day. Nancy did not have one. No overnight caregiver. A home health agency in Tucson charges a few $100s a week for that service. Nancy had no one. No alarm system. No replacement dog after the family pet died. Nothing. Savannah Guthrie, Nancy's other daughter, is one of the highest paid broadcast journalists in the United States. The combined financial capacity across this family was more than sufficient to put every single one of those protections in place with one phone call and a credit card. None of it was done. And if Annie was in a financial position where she needed to ask her 84-year-old mother for a loan and was refused, then the absence of those protections stops looking like an oversight. It starts looking like a choice. A deliberate, considered choice that left Nancy Guthrie completely reachable on the night of January 31, 2026. Now, the dinner. At 5:32 in the evening, Nancy requested an Uber from her residence. The driver picked her up and took her to Annie and Tommaso's home. That ride is fully documented. Timestamps, driver cooperation, everything on the record, clean. Think about what that dinner table held. Somewhere in the weeks before that evening, a mother had refused her daughter's request for money. The conversation had happened, the word no had been spoken, and now they were sitting across from each other, sharing a meal, playing games. Whether the subject came up again that night is unknown. Whether the atmosphere was warm or strained is unknown. What is known is that after that dinner ended, Tommaso Cion drove Nancy Guthrie home. That drive is 4 miles. It takes approximately 10 minutes. And it is completely undocumented. No third-party camera recorded their departure. No rideshare app generated a timestamp. No neighbor witnessed the arrival. Tommaso stated that he walked Nancy inside. He stated that he watched the garage door close behind her. He stated that he then left. That account stands completely alone. There is no independent corroboration from any source whatsoever. The husband of the daughter who had recently been refused a loan was the last known person to see Nancy Guthrie. And his version of those final minutes is the only version that exists. That is not an accusation. That is a fact, and in any serious investigation, when the last person to see a missing woman is the spouse of someone with a documented financial connection to that woman, that account does not get accepted at face value. It gets examined, and what the examination revealed is where this case takes a turn that changes everything. 14 hours and 13 minutes. That is the gap between the moment the garage door closed behind Nancy Guthrie at approximately 9:50 on the night of January 31st and the moment Annie Guthrie called 911 the following afternoon at 12:03. 14 hours. And in all of that time, nobody from that household made contact with Nancy. No call, no text, no drive-by, no knock on the door. Nothing. Nancy was 84 years old. She had a pacemaker. She needed medication at 10 o'clock that the Pima County Sheriff himself publicly stated could have serious consequences if missed. She was about to remove her hearing aids and become completely unable to hear anything happening around her. She was alone in a house with no active cameras, no alarm, no caregiver, and no way to call for help once those hearing aids came out. The people who drove her home knew all of this. And they said nothing, did nothing, for 14 hours and 13 minutes. In families where an aging parent lives alone, the goodnight message is automatic. The morning check-in is routine. A 3-second text, home safe, sleep well. That small ritual exists because people who love someone make sure that person knows they are not forgotten at the end of the night. That ritual was absent on January 31, 2026. Its absence created something very specific. A clean, uninterrupted window of time. 14 hours where the only mechanism for discovering that something had gone wrong was a church friend who noticed an empty chair during a Sunday morning livestream. Not a daughter, not a son-in-law, a church friend. Now here is where the pacemaker data enters the picture. At 1:47 in the morning on February 1st, the doorbell camera at Nancy's residence captured something. A figure. The camera then went dark. And at that same moment, Nancy's pacemaker registered what investigators have described as an acute stress response. Her heart, recorded by a device implanted in her chest, told a story that no one in that house was awake to witness. At 2:28 in the morning, Nancy's pacemaker lost its connection with the home monitoring unit. She had been moved. Her heart was still beating. She was alive, but she was no longer in her home. And the people 4 miles away, the people who had just had dinner with her, the people who drove her home, still had not called. The next contact from that household came at 11:56 in the morning when Annie arrived at Nancy's residence. Annie called 911 at 12:03. 7 minutes passed between Annie arriving at the home of her missing 84-year-old mother and picking up the phone to call for help. 7 minutes. And what was said during that 911 call may be the single most important piece of evidence in this entire investigation. Because that call has never been heard by the public. Not the recording, not a transcript, not even a partial summary of what was reported. In Arizona, 911 recordings are public records. Journalists can legally request them. In the vast majority of high-profile missing person cases, those recordings surface within days. 3 months into this investigation, nobody has heard what Annie said. Retired Detective Bob Gilliam appeared on Chris McDonough's Interview Room podcast and addressed this directly. He said there is likely investigative information on that recording that law enforcement does not want disclosed to the public at this stage. He said not to hold breath waiting for it. And then he said the thing that stopped people cold. He said that call may not surface until a trial date approaches. A trial. That word does not get used casually by a retired detective with decades of experience. A trial implies charges. It implies an arrest. It implies that the trajectory of this case, despite months of apparent quiet, leads to a courtroom. And that the 911 call is being preserved as evidence for that proceeding. But there is another layer to that sealed call that Gilliam raised. He asked what Annie described when she called. Did she mention the evidence near the front porch immediately? Did she describe the open back door? Did she reference the flower pot that was reportedly propping it open? Or did she describe details she could not have known unless she had already seen them before that moment? In cases where someone connected to a victim is involved in that victim's disappearance, trained investigators listen to 911 calls for one specific thing. Information the caller should not yet have. Details that a person arriving at a scene for the first time would not be able to report. If Annie described that scene with a level of precision that exceeded what a genuinely shocked first-time witness would provide, that is exactly the kind of information that gets a 911 call sealed. That is the kind of information a retired detective says will not be released until a trial date is set. Now, the car. Annie Guthrie drives a Honda CR-V. The FBI seized it. And they held it for over 40 days. 40 days is not standard processing time for the vehicle of someone who has been cleared. A routine forensic sweep of a witness's car takes hours. Maybe a day or two for more complex cases. 40 days means something required extended analysis. It means the forensic team either found something that took weeks to fully examine, or the data pulled from the vehicle's onboard systems did not immediately match the account investigators had been given. Modern vehicles are essentially mobile recording devices. They log GPS routes, door events, speed. Every function is time-stamped and stored. If the story being told is that Tommaso drove Nancy home and went directly back, the car's data should confirm that story within 48 hours. 40 days means it did not. 40 days means something in that vehicle needed to be fully understood before it was returned. And the FBI has not told the public what those 40 days produced. That silence is not nothing. That silence is information. And while the FBI was working through whatever they found in that car, something else was happening. Something that no legal process had authorized. Something that, once the photographs surfaced, generated a response online that this case had not seen before. Boxes were leaving Nancy Guthrie's home. Photographs emerged showing individuals at Nancy's residence loading items into vehicles. Annie's Honda CR-V was visible in those photographs. Personal belongings were being carried out of the home of a woman who has not been declared dead. No death certificate exists. No probate proceeding has been initiated. No court has issued any order authorizing the removal of anything from that property. And yet the removal was happening. True crime reporter JLR Investigates, who has been covering this case on the ground since the beginning, posted a simple public question. Someone is planning to move into Nancy Guthrie's home. Who could it be? The response that drew the most attention was even simpler. Someone who cannot afford their own property taxes. That response went viral, because people who had been following this case for months had already been asking their own questions about financial motivation. And those boxes, leaving an unoccupied $1 million home while the owner is still missing and no legal authority has sanctioned their removal, gave those questions a visual anchor they had not had before. And then there is Cameron. Nancy Guthrie has a son. His name is Cameron. He is Nancy's child, Annie's brother, Savannah's brother. In 3 months of one of the most closely watched missing person cases in recent American history, Cameron has not made a single public statement. Not one press conference appearance. Not one social media post about his missing mother. Not one interview. Not one word. Savannah has been visible, understandably given her public role at NBC. Annie has been part of the public narrative surrounding the case. Cameron does not exist in this story. And in missing person investigations, when a family member is completely absent from the public record, that absence is never accidental. Sometimes it reflects grief so deep that public exposure feels impossible. Sometimes it reflects legal counsel advising silence. And sometimes it means something else entirely. Cameron's silence is not evidence of anything on its own, but it is a question this investigation has not answered. And unanswered questions in a case this serious do not stay quiet forever. Now, the laboratory in Virginia. While the financial thread was building in the public record, forensic work was proceeding in silence. A hair recovered from Nancy Guthrie's home, a rootless hair, which is among the most technically difficult biological material to analyze, was sent to 2 separate facilities. The FBI's laboratory at Quantico, Virginia, received it. Astria Forensics in San Francisco received it as well. Astria Forensics is not an ordinary lab. It is the same facility whose work contributed to the conviction of Rex Heuermann, the man identified as the Long Island serial killer. Forensic genealogist Cece Moore is involved in the analysis. Cece Moore has cracked cases that sat cold for decades using nothing more than degraded biological material and publicly available genealogy databases. The first search of the Cody's database came back negative. Whoever left that hair in Nancy Guthrie's home has never been arrested. No criminal record, no prior convictions, a clean history by every law enforcement measure. That result is significant in a way that most people have not fully absorbed. It eliminates opportunists. It eliminates career criminals. It eliminates strangers who wander through neighborhoods looking for unlocked doors. The profile being built by that hair sample describes someone living an ordinary life. Someone who attends family dinners. Someone who drives elderly women home at night. Someone who signs legal documents and sits at dinner tables and goes to bed in a house 4 miles away. The DNA does not yet have a name. But the profile it is assembling matches the financial picture this case has been building from the very beginning. Now, let the full sequence be seen one final time. May 2025. A durable power of attorney is signed. Tommaso gives Annie authority over his financial and property affairs. 8 months before Nancy disappeared. Sometime before January 31, 2026. Annie reportedly asks Nancy for a loan. Nancy says no. That word becomes the starting point of everything that follows. January 31, 5:32 in the evening. Nancy takes a documented Uber to Annie and Tommaso's home for dinner. January 31, approximately 9:50 at night. Tommaso drives Nancy home. No camera, no witness, no independent record, his account alone. 9:50 that night to 12:03 the following afternoon. 14 hours and 13 minutes of complete silence. No call, no text, no visit from the people 4 miles away who knew exactly how vulnerable she was. February 1, 1:47 in the morning. A masked figure appears at the doorbell camera. The camera goes dark. The pacemaker registers an acute stress response. February 1, 2:28 in the morning. The pacemaker loses its connection with the home monitoring unit. Nancy has been moved. Her heart is still beating. She is alive. February 1, 12:03 in the afternoon. Annie calls 911. That call is currently sealed. A retired detective says it will not be released until a trial date is set. February through March. Annie's Honda CR-V is seized by the FBI and held for over 40 days while investigators conduct exhaustive forensic analysis. April 2026. Photographs surface showing people removing items from Nancy's home. Annie's vehicle is present. No legal process has authorized any of it. May 2026. Reports emerge that someone is planning to move into Nancy Guthrie's residence. Nancy has not been declared dead. Nancy has not been found. Every item in that sequence has a version that means nothing. A power of attorney can be routine paperwork. A dinner can be just a dinner. A gap in phone calls can be an honest oversight. Boxes can be moved for reasons that have nothing to do with anything sinister. Every piece has an innocent explanation. But accepting each innocent explanation in isolation requires ignoring the piece that came before it and the piece that comes after it. It requires pretending the sequence does not exist. It requires looking at the direction this trail is pointing and deciding, deliberately, to look somewhere else. The innocent explanations stop being the most likely ones. They become the ones that require the most effort to believe. Brian Entin told Parade magazine on May 3 that cooperation between the Pima County Sheriff's Office and the FBI has improved significantly. But a sitting county official publicly accused the sheriff of allowing personal feelings to interfere with the federal investigation. That accusation has never been retracted. Ed Smart, the father of Elizabeth Smart, a man who understands better than almost anyone what it means to wait for a missing family member, appeared on News Nation and chose his words with extraordinary care. He said, "The Guthries have supposedly been cleared." Supposedly. That word is carrying enormous weight. It is the word of a man who respects the official position while deliberately leaving open the possibility that the official position is not the final one. NBC News built a specific protocol for this case. If breaking news about Nancy Guthrie develops during a live broadcast, Savannah is removed from the set. A different anchor handles the story on camera. The information is delivered to Savannah privately and away from the audience. That protocol was used on April 15. Savannah was pulled mid-broadcast after teasing a segment. She returned later without explanation. 2 days after that, she was absent from the broadcast entirely. Networks do not build those procedures for cases they believe are going cold. They build them for cases where they are expecting a moment, an arrest, a discovery, a name finally spoken out loud, a moment that will reach a family member in real time on national television. NBC is not preparing for silence. NBC is preparing for something. And CeCe Moore is still working. The hair sample is still being analyzed. The genealogy databases are still being searched. The genetic profile is still being assembled, piece by piece, strand by strand, moving toward a name that is already in this story somewhere. A name connected to a dinner table, a drive home, a garage door closing on the night of January 31st Street. Nancy Guthrie is 84 years old. She is still out there. Her pacemaker is still running, still counting, still recording every heartbeat of whatever she is living through right now. She deserves to come home. She deserves to have every question in this case answered fully and without flinching. She said one word, no. She said it to her daughter. She said it the way mothers say no when they mean it. When they have worked too hard and sacrificed too much to hand over what they built without understanding why. And that word, that honest, human, completely reasonable word, may have been the one that set everything in motion. The financial trail runs from a signed document in May of 2025 all the way to boxes leaving $1 million home in April of 2026. It runs through a dinner table and a 10-minute drive and 14 hours of silence and a sealed phone call and 40 days of forensic examination. It runs directly through that one word. And the next video is going to go somewhere this case has not gone publicly yet. There is a specific detail buried inside the pacemaker data, a timestamp that has been largely overlooked, that does not line up with the account that was given about the night of January 31st. When that data is laid against the car's telemetric record and the doorbell camera timeline side by side, the gap it reveals is not a small one. That video is coming, and once that piece is on the table, the picture this case has been assembling for 3 months will look very different than it does right now. Do not miss it.